What keeps you awake? When the world feels heavy on your shoulders, when responsibilities press down like stones. Tonight, we walk beside Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher who wore a crown, yet sought only peace within. His private journal, never meant for others' eyes, became our most treasured map to serenity. Feel yourself settling deeper as we trace his path from anxious prince to enlightened emperor. The marble halls of Rome fade around us, replaced by the quiet sanctuary of contemplation. His struggles with duty, loss, and the relentless demands of power mirror our own daily battles with overwhelm. Through plague-ravaged cities and blood-soaked battlefields, he discovered that true strength flows from acceptance, not resistance. Let his gentle wisdom wash over you like warm bathwater, dissolving the tensions you've carried. Close your eyes and breathe deeply as we begin this journey toward the stillness he found. Tonight, his ancient peace becomes your modern sanctuary. The weight of expectation can crush a soul before it learns to stand. Young Marcus understood this truth intimately, feeling the invisible chains of destiny tightening around him with each passing year. In the sprawling villa where he spent his childhood, surrounded by gardens where peacocks strutted and fountains whispered ancient secrets, the boy who would become Rome's greatest philosopher-emperor first learned that privilege could be its own prison. His mother, Domitia Lucilla, watched her serious son with growing concern. While other noble children played war games in the courtyards, Marcus sat cross-legged beneath olive trees, reading scrolls until twilight painted the sky purple. The scent of jasmine and burning oil lamps became forever linked in his mind with the pursuit of wisdom. His tutors reported that the boy asked questions that had no easy answers, about justice, about suffering, about why good people endured terrible fates. The halls of his childhood home echoed with Greek and Latin, languages that flowed from his lips as naturally as breathing. Yet it was not the mechanics of speech that captivated him, but the ideas these ancient tongues carried. When his rhetoric teacher Fronto assigned exercises in persuasion, Marcus would spend hours afterward in his chamber, wrestling with the ethics of using words to bend others to one's will. Emperor Hadrian first noticed the boy during a state ceremony. While other children fidgeted in their formal togas, Marcus stood perfectly still, his dark eyes absorbing everything with an intensity that seemed to pierce through the pageantry to something deeper. The emperor, himself a student of philosophy, recognized a kindred spirit in this grave child, who seemed to carry the weight of understanding in his narrow shoulders. The adoption that would change everything came like a summer storm, sudden, overwhelming, transforming the landscape of his life. When Hadrian selected Antoninus Pius as his successor, with the condition that Antoninus adopt Marcus, the boy felt his quiet dreams of a scholar's life dissolve like morning mist. The marble corridors of the imperial palace were beautiful but cold, and young Marcus found himself longing for the warm simplicity of his mother's garden. His new life brought tutors of extraordinary caliber. The Stoic philosopher Rusticus introduced him to Epictetus, whose teachings would become the bedrock of his existence. Marcus devoured the discourses, finding in those pages a map for navigating the treacherous waters ahead. The idea that we control only our responses, never external events, struck him with the force of revelation. He began carrying a small notebook, filling it with observations and reminders to himself, the earliest seeds of what would become his meditations. Sleep often eluded him in those years of transition. He would lie awake listening to the night sounds of Rome, distant wheels on cobblestones, the calls of the night watch, dogs barking in the suburbs. His mind churned with questions about duty and desire, about what it meant to live well when fate had chosen your path for you. The stars visible through his window seemed to mock his small human concerns, yet also to offer a strange comfort in their eternal indifference. At 15, he received the toga virilis, marking his passage into manhood. The ceremony felt like a door closing on any possibility of retreat. That night he wrote in his journal for the first time, beginning a practice that would sustain him through decades of trial. His early entries reveal a young man struggling to reconcile his gentle nature with the iron requirements of imperial duty. The betrothal to Faustina came when he was 17, arranged by Antoninus to strengthen political alliances. Yet when Marcus first saw her at a palace gathering, something unexpected stirred in his philosopher's heart. She moved through the crowd like music itself, her laughter bright as silver bells. For the first time, he understood that wisdom alone could not encompass the fullness of human experience. Their courtship unfolded against a backdrop of state dinners and ceremonial obligations. In stolen moments between official duties, they would walk in the palace gardens, discussing poetry and philosophy. Faustina challenged his serious nature, teasing him gently when he quoted Stoic maxims. "Must everything be a lesson?" she would ask, her eyes dancing with mischief. Through her, he discovered that joy could coexist with duty. Yet even love could not quiet the growing dread he felt about his future. The empire stretched from Britain to Persia. Millions of souls whose welfare would one day rest in his hands. How could one man, however well-intentioned, bear such responsibility without being crushed? His notebooks from this period show him grappling with the paradox of power, how to wield authority without being corrupted by it. Antoninus Pius proved an exceptional mentor, though his lessons often came disguised as casual conversation. Walking together through the forum, the emperor would point out a merchant arguing over prices, a mother scolding her child, slaves carrying heavy loads. "Look closely," he would say. "Every person you see carries burdens you cannot imagine. A ruler must remember this." Marcus absorbed these teachings like parched earth drinking rain. The palace school where Marcus studied alongside other noble youths became his laboratory for understanding human nature. He observed how power revealed character. Some boys grew cruel with privilege, others generous. He noted his own responses to praise and criticism, learning to maintain equilibrium regardless of external judgment. His fellow students found him strange, this prince who preferred philosophy to chariot races. Physical training occupied his mornings, though he approached it as another form of discipline rather than enjoyment. The gymnasiums of Rome rang with the clash of practice swords and the grunts of wrestlers. Marcus, slight of build and bookish by nature, forced himself through the exercises, understanding that an emperor must appear strong even if his true strength lay elsewhere. His 20th year brought increased responsibilities as Antoninus began sharing the actual work of governance. Marcus sat beside his adoptive father in the Senate, learning to navigate the complex currents of Roman politics. He discovered that philosophical ideals often shattered against the rocks of practical necessity. Compromise, he learned, was not weakness but wisdom in action. The correspondence that survives from these years reveals a young man slowly transforming into a leader. His letters to Fronto show him wrestling with questions of justice and mercy, trying to understand how to balance the competing demands of different groups within the empire. He wrote of sleepless nights spent reviewing legal cases, knowing that his decisions would ripple through countless lives. As his 25th year approached, Marcus felt the approach of destiny like a distant storm. Antoninus, though still vigorous, had begun preparing him for succession. The prince who had once dreamed of a quiet life of study now stood at the threshold of ultimate power. His philosophical practice, rather than offering escape, had become his method for accepting what could not be changed. The tension between his inner life and outer obligations grew sharper with each passing month. In public, he played the role of heir apparent with increasing skill. In private, his journal entries revealed a man struggling to maintain his humanity, while preparing to become the symbol of Roman authority. He wrote of feeling like an actor who could never leave the stage, forever performing a role that threatened to consume his authentic self. His relationship with Faustina deepened during these years, becoming his anchor in an increasingly turbulent world. Their marriage had produced children, and fatherhood added another layer to his understanding of responsibility. Holding his infant daughter, he would marvel at the fierce protective instinct that arose, even as he knew that his duties to the empire would often pull him away from these tender moments. The philosophical schools of Rome became his refuge when court life grew overwhelming. he would slip away to attend lectures, sitting among students who didn't recognize the heir to the throne in their midst. These hours of pure learning, free from the weight of his position, sustained his spirit like secret springs of clear water in a desert. As Antoninus aged, the reality of succession pressed closer. Marcus watched his adoptive father handle the daily business of empire with a grace that seemed effortless, but which Marcus knew required enormous effort. He studied every decision, every gesture, preparing for the day when the burden would shift to his shoulders. The final years of his preparation were marked by a deepening philosophical practice. His notebooks show him developing the ideas that would later appear in his meditations, thoughts on mortality, duty, and the nature of the good life. He was constructing a philosophical framework strong enough to support him through whatever trials lay ahead. Standing at the edge of supreme power, Marcus Aurelius had transformed from an anxious boy into a man of remarkable inner strength. Yet the greatest tests still lay before him. Soon, very soon, the crown would rest upon his head, and with it would come challenges that would push his stoic principles to their absolute limits. The plague was already gathering in the eastern provinces, like a shadow creeping toward the heart of the empire. And the Germanic tribes were stirring beyond the northern borders, testing Rome's defenses with increasing boldness. The weight of empire settled on Marcus's shoulders like a leaden cloak on the day Antoninus died. At 39, he found himself master of the known world. Yet the first crisis arrived before the funeral pyres had cooled. Messengers burst into the palace with news that would define his reign. A mysterious illness spreading through the eastern legions, soldiers falling like wheat before an invisible scythe. The plague entered Rome disguised as rumor, then revealed itself as apocalypse. Within weeks, the eternal city transformed into a vast hospital, where the living barely outnumbered the dying. Marcus walked among the sick despite his advisors' protests, touching fevered foreheads, offering water to cracked lips. The sweet smell of incense could not mask the stench of death that hung over the city like a shroud. In his private chambers each night, exhausted beyond measure, he opened his journal. The entries from these early plague days reveal a man wrestling with cosmic questions, while Rome burned with fever. "The universe is transformation," he wrote by flickering lamplight. "Our life is what our thoughts make it." These were not abstract philosophical musing, but survival tools, each reflection a rope thrown to his drowning spirit. The death toll mounted with terrifying speed. Carts rolled through the streets at dawn, collecting bodies like a grim harvest. The Tiber ran thick with ash from the funeral pyres that burned day and night. Marcus ordered the imperial treasury opened, grain distributed freely, physicians dispatched to every quarter. Yet for every life saved, 10 more slipped away like sand through desperate fingers. His morning routine became his anchor in the chaos. Rising before dawn, he would stand at his window, watching the first light touch the 7 hills. In these quiet moments, he practiced what he called the discipline of perception, training himself to see events without the coloring of emotion. The plague was neither good nor evil. It simply was. His task was to respond with wisdom, rather than react with fear. The Germanic tribes chose this moment of weakness to test Rome's borders. Reports arrived of villages burning along the Danube, of legions retreating before barbarian hordes. His generals urged immediate military response, but Marcus understood that an empire fighting disease and invasion simultaneously faced annihilation. He needed to become something he had never wanted to be: a warrior philosopher. The transformation required was profound. The man who had spent decades studying in comfortable libraries now learned to sleep in a military tent. His soft hands, more accustomed to holding scrolls than swords, developed calluses from weapons training. Yet even as he prepared for war, his philosophical practice deepened rather than diminished. Before departing for the northern frontier, he faced a private agony that cut deeper than any barbarian blade. Whispers had reached him of Faustina's infidelities, rumors that she had taken lovers among the gladiators and senators. The court buzzed with gossip like wasps around rotting fruit. Lesser men would have raged, perhaps ordered executions, but Marcus chose a different path. His journal entries from this period show him practicing a radical form of forgiveness. How much trouble he avoids who does not look to see what his neighbor says or does, he wrote, the ink blotted with what might have been tears. He chose to see Faustina not as a betrayer, but as a fellow human struggling with her own demons, deserving of compassion rather than condemnation. The march north took him through lands ravaged by both plague and war. Villages stood empty, their inhabitants fled or dead. Crops rotted in fields with no one to harvest them. His soldiers, already weakened by disease, faced the additional terror of an enemy that struck from forest shadows. Marcus rode among them, sharing their hardships, eating the same meager rations, sleeping on the same cold ground. Around campfires in the Germanic wilderness, he continued writing. His tent became a mobile sanctuary where philosophy met the brutal realities of war. The impediment to action advances action, he reflected, watching sparks rise toward stars. What stands in the way becomes the way. Every obstacle, disease, betrayal, warfare, transformed into an opportunity to practice virtue. The battles, when they came, were chaos incarnate. Germanic warriors, painted in woad and howling like demons, crashed against Roman shields in waves of violence. Marcus, who had once flinched at the sight of blood during sacrifices, now stood in the front lines, his purple cloak a target for enemy arrows. He discovered that courage was not the absence of fear, but right action in spite of it. Between campaigns, devastating personal losses struck like hammer blows. His children began dying one after another, victims of the plague that respected no rank. He held his youngest son as the boy burned with fever, whispering stoic teachings that suddenly seemed hollow against a father's grief. Yet even in these darkest moments, his philosophy evolved rather than shattered. "What is grief but love with nowhere to go?" he wrote after burying another child. He learned to hold sorrow and joy simultaneously, understanding that they were not opposites but complementary aspects of a full human life. The pain of loss became proof of the depth of love, and he would not trade one for the other. The court intrigue that had always swirled around the imperial palace intensified during his absences. His adoptive brother Lucius Verus, made co-emperor at Marcus's insistence, proved weak and dissolute. Senators plotted, generals schemed, and Marcus found himself fighting battles on multiple fronts. Yet his responses showed remarkable restraint. When presented with evidence of conspiracy, he chose exile over execution. When advisors counseled harsh reprisals against rebellious provinces, he opted for clemency. His meditations from this period reveal his reasoning. The best revenge is not to be like your enemy. He understood that cruelty, even in the name of justice, corrupted the soul of the one who wielded it. The Antonine Plague reached its peak in his third year of rule. Bodies piled in the streets faster than they could be burned. The living abandoned the dying, fear overcoming family bonds. Marcus ordered that no one should be turned away from the imperial granaries, even as his advisors warned of depleting reserves. He sold palace furnishings to fund relief efforts, transforming golden ornaments into bread for the starving. His own health began to fail under the strain. Physicians noted his pallor, his persistent cough, the way his hands trembled when he thought no one was watching. Yet he pushed forward, driven by duty rather than desire. His journal entries became more urgent, as if he sensed time running short and needed to capture hard-won wisdom before it was too late. The practice of morning reflection became his shield against despair. Each dawn, before facing the day's trials, he would remind himself of fundamental truths. People would disappoint him. This was not cynicism, but realism that prevented bitterness. Events would unfold beyond his control. Accepting this brought peace rather than frustration. Death would come for all. Remembering this made each moment precious rather than terrifying. During the worst of the plague years, he developed what he called the view from above meditation. In his mind, he would rise above the earth, seeing Rome as a small cluster of buildings, the empire as a tiny portion of the world itself as a speck in the cosmos. From this perspective, the urgent catastrophes that demanded his attention revealed themselves as temporary perturbations in an eternal order. The Germanic campaigns dragged on for years, a grinding war of attrition that drained the empire's resources and spirit. Marcus aged rapidly, his hair whitening like frost, lines etching themselves deep into his face. Yet his soldiers loved him, this strange emperor who quoted philosophy while planning battles, who shared their sufferings without complaint. His relationship with Faustina, despite the rumors and pain, evolved into something deeper than conventional marriage. She accompanied him on campaigns, earning the title Mother of the Camps. Whatever her failures, she stood beside him through the darkest years. His journal shows him choosing gratitude over grievance, focusing on her loyalty in public rather than her possible betrayals in private. The concept of amor fati, love of fate, crystallized during these trials. He learned not merely to accept what happened, but to embrace it fully. The plague, the wars, the betrayals, the losses, all became threads in a tapestry he could not see whole, but trusted was meaningful. This was not passive resignation, but active engagement with reality as it was, rather than as he wished it to be. His philosophical practice became increasingly practical, focused on immediate application rather than abstract theory. When overwhelmed by the empire's problems, he would break them down into manageable pieces. When faced with difficult people, he would remind himself that they too were struggling with their own battles. When tempted to despair, he would return to the present moment, the only time where action was possible. The death of Lucius Verus brought both grief and relief. His co-emperor's demise meant consolidated authority, but also the loss of a brother, however flawed. Marcus's meditation on this event shows his mature philosophy. Loss is nothing else but change, and change is nature's delight. He mourned the man while accepting the natural order that demanded all things pass. As the plague finally began to recede and the Germanic tribes sought peace, Marcus might have returned to Rome in triumph. Instead, he remained on the frontier, understanding that showing strength prevented future conflicts. His tent continued to serve as both command center and philosophical retreat, where the most powerful man in the world wrestled with questions that power could not answer. The transformation was complete. The reluctant prince had become a warrior philosopher, tempered by trials that would have broken a weaker spirit. His meditations, never intended for other eyes, had become his method for transmuting suffering into wisdom. Each entry was a conversation with his better self, a reminder of who he aspired to be despite the pressures to become something less. Standing on the banks of the Danube, watching the sun set over lands finally at peace, Marcus understood that his greatest battles had been internal. The real enemy was never plague or barbarians, but his own potential for bitterness, cruelty, and despair. Through philosophical discipline, he had found a way to remain human while wielding inhuman power. The final entries from this period of crisis show a man at peace with paradox. He had learned to be gentle without being weak, firm without being cruel, detached without being cold. The boy who had once feared the weight of empire had discovered that the burden became bearable when carried with wisdom. Yet the greatest insights still awaited him, born from years of practice under pressure, ready to crystallize into teachings that would outlive the empire itself. His meditations crystallized during the Marcomannic Wars, written not for posterity, but as private therapy. Each reflection was a balm applied to wounds that power and responsibility had torn open. In the flickering light of his campaign tent, while Germanic winds howled outside, and sentries paced through frozen mud, Marcus bent over his wax tablets. He searched for words to heal what the day had damaged. These were not philosophical treatises meant to impress scholars, but intimate conversations with his own soul, raw and honest as prayer. The central insight emerged like dawn breaking over a battlefield. We suffer not from events themselves, but from our judgments about those events. And this recognition brought profound relief. When news arrived of another village burned by raiders, his first instinct was anguish. But then came the pause, the breath, the question he had trained himself to ask. What is this event without my opinion attached to it? Houses reduced to ash, yes. Lives disrupted, certainly. But the rage, the despair, the sense of cosmic injustice, these were additions his mind supplied, not inherent in the events themselves. This was not cold detachment, but warm liberation. He discovered he could feel appropriate sorrow without being consumed by it, could take necessary action without being driven by emotional turbulence. The death of a soldier became not a reason for bitter hatred of enemies, but an occasion to honor courage and accept mortality. A senator's betrayal transformed from personal wound into simple information about human nature, requiring response, but not internal torment. He developed the practice of morning reflection, greeting each day by reminding himself that he would encounter difficult people, but their actions belonged to them, while his responses belonged to him alone. Before his servants entered to dress him for the day's duties, before the first courier arrived with urgent dispatches, he would sit in the pre-dawn darkness and prepare his mind. Today, I shall meet with interference, ingratitude, insolence, disloyalty, ill will, and selfishness, he would tell himself, not with cynicism, but with calm acceptance, like a farmer noting that fields contain both wheat and weeds. This mental preparation transformed his daily interactions. When a tribune spoke disrespectfully during a war council, Marcus felt the initial flash of anger, but then he remembered his morning meditation. The man's rudeness was his own burden to carry. Marcus's task was to extract whatever useful information the report contained and respond with measured wisdom. When merchants cheated soldiers on supplies, he addressed the practical problem without letting indignation poison his inner peace. The concept of memento mori became his daily companion, not as morbid obsession, but as liberation. Remembering death's inevitability made petty concerns dissolve like morning mist. He kept a human skull on his campaign desk, not from macabre fascination, but as a gentle teacher. When anxiety about battle outcomes threatened to overwhelm him, a glance at that ivory reminder restored perspective. If death could come at any moment, why waste precious life force on worry about possibilities? This practice infused his moments with unexpected sweetness. A simple meal of bread and olives became a feast, when eaten with full awareness that it might be the last. The sight of sunrise over the Danube brought tears of gratitude, rather than taken for granted routine. Even difficult conversations with hostile tribal leaders gained a quality of preciousness. These too were experiences available only to the living, worthy of full presence. His understanding of the logos, the rational principle governing the universe, provided comfort during chaos, like finding a steady heartbeat beneath life's frantic surface rhythms. In quiet moments between battles, he would contemplate the ordered movements of stars overhead, the predictable cycle of seasons, the way rivers always found their path to the sea. Beneath human confusion lay cosmic order, and he was part of that greater harmony, even when immediate circumstances seemed discordant. This wasn't passive fatalism, but active alignment. If the universe operated according to reason, then his task was to harmonize his own reason with that larger pattern. When plague struck his camp, he didn't rage against divine injustice, but asked what reasonable response the situation demanded. When supply lines failed, he sought not someone to blame, but the most logical solution. The Logos became his North Star, guiding decisions through fog of war and political intrigue. He taught himself to see obstacles as opportunities for virtue, transforming every setback into a chance to practice patience, courage, or wisdom. With the dedication of an athlete training for competition, a delayed river crossing became an exercise in patience. A cowardly officer's failure became an opportunity to practice understanding and appropriate correction. Even his own physical ailments, the persistent cough, the stomach pains that plagued his later years, became training grounds for endurance. His journal entries from this period read like training logs. Today, practiced courage when the Quadi ambushed our scouts, maintained composure despite initial fear. Tomorrow, must work on responding to bad news with greater equanimity. He approached virtue like a craftsman perfecting his skill, knowing that mastery came only through repetition under pressure. The discipline of desire became his shield against disappointment, learning to want what happened rather than demanding that what he wanted should happen. This profound shift didn't mean abandoning preferences, but holding them lightly. Yes, he preferred peace to war, health to sickness, loyalty to betrayal. But when reality delivered the opposite, he trained himself to embrace what was, rather than exhaust himself fighting what couldn't be changed. The practice transformed even tragic losses into strange gifts. When his beloved teacher, Rusticus, died, Marcus grieved deeply, but then asked himself, would I trade the years of learning for immunity from this pain? The answer was always no. The loss proved the value of what had been, and he learned to be grateful for the temporary loan of precious people rather than bitter about their inevitable return to the universal whole. His practice of negative visualization prepared him for loss by imagining it beforehand, making actual hardships feel like familiar visitors rather than shocking intruders. Each night, he would mentally rehearse possible disasters, defeat in battle, death of loved ones, his own mortal ending. Far from depressing him, this practice brought strange comfort. When dawn arrived with everyone still breathing, every small normalcy became cause for quiet celebration. This mental preparation served him well during actual crises. When word came that another of his children had died, the blow still struck hard, but not with the added force of surprise. He had already imagined this moment, had already thought through how he would respond, what duties would still require attention, how he would comfort Faustina. The grief was real but manageable, like a river flowing within prepared channels, rather than a flash flood destroying everything in its path. The view from above meditation helped him see human conflicts as temporary disturbances on the surface of an eternal, peaceful cosmos. During particularly frustrating negotiations with tribal chieftains, each side insisting on incompatible demands, he would excuse himself briefly. Standing outside the command tent, he would close his eyes and imagine rising above the earth, higher and higher, until the Roman camp became a speck, the Danube a thread, the entire conflict invisible from cosmic height. From this elevated perspective, the urgent crisis that had consumed his attention revealed itself as one tiny eddy in an ocean of time and space. The practice didn't make problems disappear, but restored proportion. Returning to negotiations, he could engage fully, while maintaining the deep calm of someone who understood that in 1,000 years, both Rome and its enemies would be dust. But the principles of justice and wisdom would endure. Through years of practice, he discovered that happiness wasn't a destination to reach, but a way of traveling, found in the quality of attention he brought to each present moment. The young Marcus had believed happiness would come with achievement, mastering Greek, earning praise from tutors, making his mother proud. The Emperor Marcus learned that happiness lived in the space between stimulus and response, in the moment of choice where he decided how to interpret events. Writing by lamplight while winter pressed against his tent walls, he captured this insight in words that would echo through centuries. Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking. The happiness he described wasn't giddy pleasure, but deep contentment, the satisfaction of aligning action with principle regardless of outcome. His meditations reveal a man constructing meaning from suffering, building a cathedral of wisdom from stones of hardship. Each entry represents another support beam in this architecture of inner peace. The repetition of certain themes, acceptance, perspective, virtue, mortality, shows him returning again and again to fundamental truths, not because he had forgotten them, but because knowing and embodying were different challenges. The physical act of writing became itself a spiritual practice, the scratch of stylus on wax, the careful formation of Greek letters, the pause to find precise words, all served to slow his racing thoughts and create space for wisdom to emerge. Sometimes he wrote the same idea multiple ways, like a sculptor working clay, seeking the perfect form to capture an elusive truth. His philosophical breakthroughs often came during moments of extreme pressure. Facing a charging Germanic warrior, time slowed as his trained body responded, while his mind observed with strange detachment. Later, he would write about the experience, trying to capture that state of absolute presence where fear had no foothold, because there was no gap between perception and action. The entries about Faustina show his philosophy applied to its greatest personal test. He wrote of choosing to see her best qualities, of interpreting ambiguous actions charitably, of understanding that his peace couldn't depend on her behavior. Whether the rumors were true mattered less than his response to them. He could investigate and act on facts, but he refused to torture himself with suspicions or poison his days with resentment. As years of warfare ground on, his philosophy evolved from theoretical understanding to lived experience. The young student who had memorized Epictetus now embodied those teachings in ways his teachers could never have imagined, leading armies while maintaining inner peace, burying children while affirming life's value, facing betrayal while choosing trust. These were advanced courses in applied stoicism. His morning ritual expanded to include what he called the discipline of action. After preparing his mind for the day's challenges, he would review his duties and commit to performing them with full presence and excellence, regardless of preference. Whether signing death warrants or distributing grain to refugees, he brought the same careful attention, understanding that the quality of action mattered more than the nature of the task. The meditations capture a mind in constant dialogue with itself, questioning, refining, encouraging. "Why am I troubled by this?" he would ask, then work through the layers of assumption and attachment causing distress. What would the ideal person do here became his compass when facing difficult decisions. The journal served as both confessor and teacher, a safe space to admit weakness and discover strength. His insights about anger reveal hard-won wisdom. He wrote of anger as temporary madness, a poison we drink hoping others will suffer. Through careful self-observation, he noticed how anger arose from thwarted expectations, from the gap between his demands on reality and reality's indifference to his demands. The antidote was adjusting expectations, not trying to force the world into compliance. The final entries of his meditation show a man who had found what he sought, not perfect peace, but a reliable method for returning to peace when disturbed. Like a skilled sailor who couldn't control weather but had mastered working with wind and wave, Marcus had learned to navigate life's storms while maintaining inner equilibrium. His philosophy had become second nature, as automatic as breathing. Standing at the edge of his own mortality, he understood that his greatest achievement wasn't conquering Germanic tribes or managing plague, but conquering the tumult of his own mind. The private journal he never intended to publish had become his greatest gift to humanity. Not abstract philosophy, but practical wisdom forged in the crucible of extraordinary pressure. Proof that inner peace was possible, even for those carrying the world's weight on their shoulders. Marcus died in 180 CE on the Danube frontier, his final breath carrying the scent of river water and distant pine forests. His last thoughts focused on duty fulfilled, rather than life unlived. The physician who attended him reported that the emperor's final words were, "Go to the rising sun, I am already setting." He spoke them with the same calm acceptance he had brought to every challenge. His worn leather journal, filled with Greek reflections never meant for other eyes, lay among his few personal possessions. It was a private conversation with his soul that would sleep undiscovered for centuries. The immediate aftermath of his death brought chaos. His son Commodus abandoned everything his father had built. Where Marcus had chosen advisors for wisdom, Commodus surrounded himself with flatterers. Where Marcus had lived simply, Commodus indulged every appetite. The contrast was so stark that many Romans wondered if the gods were playing a cruel joke. They gave them a philosopher king only to follow him with his opposite. Yet Marcus had anticipated even this. He wrote in his journal about accepting what we cannot control, including the actions of our children. His meditations lay forgotten in imperial archives while Rome slowly crumbled. The manuscript passed through unknown hands during the empire's collapse. Perhaps it was saved by a Christian monk who recognized wisdom despite its pagan origin. For centuries, it gathered dust in monastery libraries, waiting like a seed in winter soil. Occasionally, a scholar might copy a passage, struck by its unexpected relevance. But the full work remained hidden from the world that needed it. The Renaissance rediscovery came like dawn after a long night. In 1558, Wilhelm Seelander found a Greek manuscript in the Vatican Library and recognized its extraordinary nature. Here was not another dry philosophical treatise. It was the intimate thoughts of a man wrestling with real problems, how to stay sane while managing impossible responsibilities, how to find peace amid chaos, how to remain good when surrounded by corruption. The first printed edition spread through European courts like wildfire. Renaissance humanists found in Marcus a kindred spirit across the centuries. His struggles with power and responsibility spoke directly to princes, navigating the treacherous politics of their time. Machiavelli had taught them how to acquire and keep power. Marcus taught them how to wield it without losing their souls. His emphasis on virtue over victory offered an alternative to the cynical pragmatism that dominated court life. The book became a secret companion to leaders facing impossible choices. Frederick the Great carried a copy during his campaigns, finding comfort in Marcus's reflections on duty and death. George Washington kept the Meditations nearby during the Revolutionary War, drawing strength from an emperor who had also reluctantly accepted military command. Lincoln discovered Marcus during the Civil War's darkest days. He found in those ancient pages a model for maintaining humanity while making terrible decisions. His insights about controlling our responses rather than our circumstances sparked a revolution in human understanding. Before Marcus, most philosophy focused on changing the external world. His radical insight was simple. We control only our judgments about events, not events themselves. This shifted attention inward. This seemingly simple idea would eventually transform how we understand mental health, laying groundwork for therapeutic approaches that help millions. Modern cognitive behavioral therapy owes an enormous debt to insights Marcus discovered through patient self-observation. When therapists teach clients to identify and challenge negative thought patterns, they're applying principles the emperor developed in his tent by lamplight. His recognition that our emotions flow from our interpretations, not directly from events, became the cornerstone of evidence-based treatment for anxiety and depression. Neuroscience now validates what Marcus intuited about the mind's plasticity. Brain imaging shows that meditation practices resembling his morning reflections literally rewire neural pathways. They strengthen areas associated with emotional regulation and weaken those linked to reactive distress. His disciplined practice of reframing thoughts created physical changes in his brain structure. These changes are now measurable with modern technology. His teachings about impermanence provide profound comfort to those facing loss. In our culture that desperately tries to make everything permanent through photography, social media, medical interventions, Marcus offers gentle acceptance of life's transient nature. His words about children dying, about friends departing, about empires falling, all written from personal experience, help modern readers face their own losses with greater equanimity. The Morning Pages practice, popularized by Julia Cameron and adopted by countless writers and artists, echoes Marcus's daily ritual of written reflection. Though separated by centuries, creative spirits discovered the same truth. Beginning each day by emptying turbulent thoughts onto paper clears mental space for inspiration. Marcus wrote to find peace. Modern practitioners write to find creativity. Both discover clarity through the simple act of moving thoughts from mind to page. His example of philosophical leadership inspires those seeking to serve rather than dominate. In an era of strongman politics and winner-take-all mentalities, Marcus models a different way. Power exercised with restraint, authority balanced with humility, strength expressed through gentleness. Modern leaders from corporate boardrooms to community organizations study his approach to managing difficult people and impossible situations. The Meditations speak with particular power to those carrying heavy responsibilities. Parents overwhelmed by the weight of raising children in uncertain times find comfort in his struggles to balance public duties with private affections. Healthcare workers facing daily tragedy discover in his words a framework for maintaining compassion without burning out. Teachers dealing with difficult students apply his techniques for seeing past surface behavior to underlying humanity. His influence extends far beyond formal philosophy into everyday wisdom. When someone takes a deep breath before responding to an insult, they're practicing Marcus's pause between stimulus and response. When a person reframes a setback as an opportunity to develop resilience, They're applying his principle of obstacle as path. His teachings have become so woven into our cultural fabric that we often use them without knowing their source. The digital age has brought new urgency to his ancient wisdom. In a world of constant notifications and infinite distractions, his emphasis on present moment awareness offers an antidote to scattered attention. His practice of morning reflection provides structure in structureless days. His acceptance of what cannot be controlled brings peace to those overwhelmed by global problems beyond individual solution. Translation after translation attempts to capture the intimacy of his original Greek. Some emphasize his philosophical precision, others his emotional depth. Each generation discovers in his words what it most needs to hear. Victorian translations stressed his moral rectitude. Modern versions highlight his psychological insights. The text remains constant, while readers find new meanings suited to their times. His vulnerability makes him remarkably accessible across cultures and centuries. This wasn't a perfect sage dispensing wisdom from above, but a struggling human being working out his salvation in fear and trembling. He wrote about his temper, his disappointments, his physical ailments. Readers recognize themselves in his struggles and find hope that if an emperor could achieve such peace, perhaps they can too. The meditations offer no easy answers, no five-step programs, no promises of effortless transformation. Instead, they model a lifelong practice of patient self-improvement. Marcus returned to the same themes repeatedly, not from failure to learn, but from understanding that wisdom requires constant reinforcement. His repetitions give readers permission to be patient with their own slow progress. His influence ripples through unexpected channels. 12-step programs echo his emphasis on accepting what cannot be changed. Sports psychologists apply his techniques for maintaining focus under pressure. Even video game designers study his insights about challenge and growth, creating experiences that transform obstacles into opportunities for player development. The book's enduring power lies not in novel ideas, but in lived example. Many philosophers have written about virtue. Marcus showed what it looked like to practice virtue while managing an empire. Others theorized about accepting death. He faced it daily on battlefields and in plague wards. His words carry weight because they emerged from experience rather than speculation. As darkness gathers outside your window tonight, his ancient peace becomes available to you. The same techniques that brought him serenity while managing the known world can quiet your racing thoughts about tomorrow's meetings or unpaid bills. His gentle reminder that confine yourself to the present offers refuge from anxiety about future possibilities or regret about past mistakes. The emperor, who wanted only to be a good human being, extends that same invitation across centuries. Not to become perfect, not to transcend human limitation, but simply to respond to what life presents with as much wisdom and kindness as you can muster in each moment. His journal shows that this is enough, that this has always been enough. Tomorrow morning, you might try his practice of greeting the day with realistic expectations about human behavior, including your own. You might pause before reacting to provocation, remembering his space between stimulus and response. You might view obstacles as training equipment for developing patience and courage. These small practices, accumulated over time, create the same transformation he achieved. His words whisper across time that your struggles matter, that your efforts to live well are noble regardless of outcome. The universe that seemed indifferent to his personal desires revealed itself as perfectly designed for developing virtue. Your own difficulties, whatever they may be, offer the same opportunity for growth that his challenges provided. Tonight, let his hard-won serenity seep into your bones like warm honey. Feel the tension leaving your shoulders as you remember that you control only your responses, not events themselves. Release the day's accumulated worries into the vast peace he found available in each present moment. His journey toward inner freedom lights the path for your own, one breath at a time. Marcus Aurelius discovered that true power lies not in controlling others, but in mastering ourselves, a lesson that brings deep peace to anyone willing to practice it. His journal reminds us we are all temporary visitors in this world, here to serve something larger than our small concerns and fears. The obstacles you face tomorrow are opportunities to practice the virtues he cultivated: patience, courage, wisdom, and acceptance of what lies beyond your control. Let his gentle strength become yours as you release the day's tensions and surrender to sleep's healing embrace. His words whisper across the centuries that you are enough, that your struggles matter, and that peace is always available in this present moment. Feel your breathing slow and deepen as his ancient wisdom settles into your bones like warm honey. The emperor who sought only to be a good human being offers you the same simple, profound goal. Rest now in the knowledge that tomorrow's challenges will meet you with whatever strength you need, just as they met him. Sweet dreams carry you toward the peace he found within himself, the peace that no external circumstance can disturb. Sleep well, knowing that his journey toward serenity lights the path for your own.